For Will Miller, it was a morning like any other. Ever since he started living in a deserted house 6 months ago, his days had been largely the same. After placing his 5-year-old daughter, April, in a safe spot, he began picking up trash behind a cafe near the train station. The cafe was not a historic shop but a chain store, the type found at various stations and malls across Chicago, accessible to everyone. Picking up trash had become a way for Will to earn a little bit for living expenses. Once a high school teacher beloved and relied upon by the community, he now bore no semblance to his former self. Clad in a grimy shirt and slightly frayed pants, working in silence. Suddenly, he noticed something shiny in the garbage. It was a slightly rusty, old key. The key had the number 38 engraved on it, but he had no idea what it unlocked. For the time being, he put it in his pocket and continued his work. He needed to finish this pointless routine quickly and pick up his daughter. From a distance, a man was intently watching him. Will felt the gaze and looked up, but no one was there. Looking around, no one seemed to be watching him, only the wind blew through. I'm just like a piece of trash. No one cares about me. Anxiety spread in his heart, but he couldn't dwell on it and returned to his work. The next day, Sarah Nowak was sitting by the window at her usual cafe, fervently typing on her laptop. At 28, her eyes were glued to the screen, occasionally frowning and muttering something. Chicago's poverty rate, and the cuts to the education budget. She was a young reporter at the well-established North River Journal, assigned her first long-term investigative journalism project on poverty. Sarah was excited about the possibility of her work bringing about social change. However, she was also troubled about how to effectively communicate the issue of poverty. Me, not having experienced poverty, what I say might not resonate with many people. Just then, she saw a man, who looked homeless, emerging from behind the cafe. Sarah was momentarily captivated by his appearance. She intuitively felt that this was the person she should interview. Believing that interviewing people experiencing poverty would enhance the persuasiveness of her reporting, Sarah immediately left the cafe to approach him. "Hello, may I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah called out. And Will, startled at first, quickly regained his composure. Sarah explained that she was a reporter and was covering poverty issues. "If I'm suitable." Will considered for a moment before accepting her request and began to speak. Due to the city's financial difficulties and resulting budget cuts, the school where Will taught history, attended primarily by low-income students, had first its educational programs and extracurricular activities cut. As a result, some students transferred to other schools, leading to a decrease in student numbers. With fewer students, the budget was cut further, and eventually, the city's education board decided to close the school. Many staff, including Will, lost their jobs. His wife had left him 3 years ago, saying, "I'm remarrying my affair partner." And since then, he had been raising his daughter April and working, but he lost his job a year ago. The subprime mortgage crisis had caused the value of the home he had managed to buy to plummet. Unable to refinance the mortgage, he was forced to sell the house for a fraction of its original value, and had been homeless for the past 6 months. Now he lived in a deserted house, picking up trash and taking temporary jobs at a community center. As Will began to recount his past, Sarah realized something. Could it be? Her voice trembled. "You're Mr. Miller from the high school I attended, aren't you?" Will was surprised and looked at Sarah. Then he remembered that she was one of his former students. "That's right, Sarah Nowak. You've become admirable." A journalist, that's amazing. It's thanks to you. When I said I wanted to become a journalist back then, my friends and other teachers laughed at me for dreaming too big. But you were the only one who encouraged me. I still appreciate it, Sarah said with deep emotion. Those were the days. But it's not my doing. It's the result of your effort. I'm proud of you. Will reminisced with a nostalgic look in his eyes. After the interview, Will suddenly remembered something. By the way, he took out the 38 key from his pants pocket and showed it to Sarah. I found this near the cafe yesterday. I don't know what it unlocks. Sarah, interested, took a photo of the key. Mr. Miller, if you don't mind, I'll look into this key for you. That would be helpful, Will said with gratitude. Later, Will and Sarah promised to meet again and parted ways. That evening, Will stopped by the homeless shelter to pick up his daughter April. April bid farewell to the shelter staff with a smile and ran happily towards her father when she saw him. Daddy, can we go get ice cream today? Will smiled and replied, of course. He let April choose an ice cream from a food truck near the park. As she ate the ice cream she had bought, April began to chat. Spending time with her father was her most enjoyable moment. Will and April returned to their abandoned home, but something was amiss. As Will looked around, a black luxury car kept passing in front of their home. Illuminated by its lights, the luxury car came and went. Fearing that something bad might happen, Will, exhausted, fell asleep. However, he was awakened by footsteps and whispering voices in the middle of the night. When he went outside, he heard the car speeding away. Trying to calm his pounding heart, he returned inside and tried to soothe himself by looking at his daughter, who was still sleeping peacefully, unaware of anything. The next day, Will headed to the cafe where he was supposed to meet Sarah again. Sarah ran up to him, out of breath. Mr. Miller, I found out what the key is for, she said excitedly. It's for a locker at the South Avenue train station. Will nodded in surprise. Really? I'll go check it out. Amazing that you figured it out. Thanks for letting me know. Yes. I found out after doing some research. And, if it's all right, I would really like to meet your daughter. Sarah smiled. Then, today, an elderly couple living near our place is looking after April. Let's go pick her up. Will said, and he and Sarah went to fetch his daughter. After picking up April from the elderly couple's house and returning to their home, Sarah handed April a cute floral notebook as a gift, saying, I heard you like drawing. This is my favorite notebook. Try drawing something in it. April happily accepted it and immediately began to draw something. Sarah watched and smiled at Will. Your daughter is wonderful. She's very talented. After eating the pizza that Sarah had brought over, an exhausted April fell asleep earlier than usual. After seeing Sarah off, Will opened a book next to April. Before he knew it, he had fallen asleep, but was awoken by approaching footsteps and whispering voices from outside. Luxury cars like the one he saw yesterday rarely passed through this area. Something was definitely amiss. Something was about to start. However, he had not yet realized what it was. The next day, Will was headed to the train station that Sarah had told him about. The sky was overcast, and the breeze felt a bit chilly on his skin. A strange tension was floating in his mind. Ever since he heard at the cafe that the key he received opened locker number 38. He had been anxious to find out what was inside it. However, part of him was also filled with unease. He had a gut feeling that it might not be something ordinary. like someone's change of clothes or a heavy book. Upon arriving at the station, Will let out a small sigh. Standing in front of the row of old coin lockers, he quickly spotted locker number 38. He inserted the key and slowly opened the door. Inside, there was a single paper bag that felt heavy. Cautiously looking around, Will took out the paper bag and gasped the moment he peeked inside. It was stuffed with more $100 bills than he had ever seen. "What is this?" Will muttered. His hands were slightly shaking. There must have been $50,000 in that paper bag. Having found such an unexpected fortune, Will, feeling the need to hide it from the surroundings, quickly left the station. Along the way, he repeatedly looked back to make sure no one was watching him. But fortunately, it seemed no one was following. When he got home, Will opened the paper bag in an uneasy manner and checked its contents. Besides the bundles of bills, there was a map and some building plans at the bottom of the brown paper bag. He had no idea what they indicated, but the anxiety that he might be involved in something serious tightened his chest. Was the map the residence of the owner of the money? If so, there should be something to identify the name. The map seemed somewhat familiar, yet not. He had never seen the building plans before. One thing was clear, even in such circumstances. This was not an ordinary event. It was unimaginable that such a large sum of money would be left in such an old locker. Will was conflicted. With this much money, he could provide a safe life for April. He could rent a new house and provide warm meals every day. During hot summers like now, they could stay cool indoors with air conditioning. And he could afford to buy April her favorite ice cream without worrying about money. Before the harsh winter arrived, they could move to a proper house. Above all, he could dress neatly again and focus on job hunting. He might be able to regain the trust and pride he had as a teacher and start a new life. Yet, another voice whispered inside him. He had never done anything dishonest. He had always taught his students, always be righteous, life isn't just about satisfying personal desires. He had preached against pursuing selfish desires. But, this money was clearly not normal. Even if someone had dropped it, putting such an amount in a coin locker was abnormal. It might even be related to a crime. After much deliberation, Will made a decision. Standing in front of a public phone, Will took out the business card Sarah had given him and called her. Without going into details, he said, "I need to talk. Can we meet behind the cafe?" Sarah seemed surprised by the sudden call but agreed to meet right away. Waiting behind the cafe, Sarah came running. Breathing heavily, she asked, "Mr. Miller, what happened?" Will was silent for a while, but finally began to talk about the coin locker incident. He honestly told her about the bundles of cash, the map, and the plans. After hearing the story, Sarah pondered for a moment before deciding. "May I consult my father about this? He's a police officer and trustworthy, so please don't worry." Sarah immediately contacted her father, Daniel. Shortly after, Daniel arrived at the back of the cafe in a patrol car. In uniform, Daniel extended his hand to Will, politely greeted him, and mentioned he had heard about him from Sarah. "I've heard you were of great help during her high school years." "Thank you." Daniel's gentle voice slightly eased Will's tension. Daniel explained that Will needed to come to the police station to sign some reports. Will, Sarah, and Daniel got into the patrol car and headed to the station. Upon arrival, Will gave a detailed statement and decided to also talk about the suspicious incidents that had been happening around the abandoned place he now called home. "I'll thoroughly investigate what this large sum of money is about." And what the map and plans mean, Daniel promised. Mr. Miller, you've done the right thing. As expected of a teacher my daughter respects, he said. Making Will feel slightly relieved. Sarah also showed interest. Dad, I think this is related to some major incident. I'll look into it too. However, Daniel cautioned her. It's too early for that. It might be dangerous, so let's wait and see a bit longer, Sarah. As they left the station, Daniel handed his business card to Will. Will, call me immediately if anything happens. For your daughter's sake, I'm here to help in any way I can, he assured as he saw them off. When he returned home, that same luxury car was parked in front of the house again. Something is definitely wrong. Will muttered to himself, but he couldn't worry April. He took her hand and they went inside. A few days later, overcome by the outdoor heat, Will felt something was amiss. Near the door of the abandoned house, an envelope the size of a postcard had fallen. With a sense of anxiety, he picked it up and checked inside. I know. That money isn't yours, it read. Will's heart skipped a beat. He hurried outside to look around, but the surroundings were as quiet as usual. However, a little distance away, he saw that luxury car parked again from yesterday. That money was undoubtedly involved in something dangerous. When April said, I want to go somewhere cool, Will hesitated for a moment. It might not be safe to go outside, it might be dangerous. But, considering the heat, staying inside the ruins was too harsh for April. While conflicted, Will suddenly remembered the public library. Shall we go to the library? Will suggested, and April cheered, yay. There are lots of picture books there, and it's cool. He said as he took April's hand and they headed to the library. Upon arriving at the public library, April immediately ran to the picture book section and began picking her favorites. Will watched over her, feeling a bit relieved. This should be safe, he reassured himself. While April enjoyed the picture books, Will decided to take some time for himself. He picked a few books from the shelf and sat next to April, starting to turn the pages. However, he might have been unaware of how tired he was. The heat, stress, and lack of sleep over the past few days had accumulated. And before he knew it, Will had dozed off. He woke up close to noon. Will instantly sat up and looked beside him. April, who should have been there, was gone. Her favorite colored pencils and notebook, which she always carried with her, were left on the table. April? Will called out in panic, but there was no response. Looking around, there was no sign of his daughter anywhere. Will's heart thudded loudly, and his palms began to sweat. Frantically, he started running around inside the library, searching for April. Excuse me, have you seen a little girl about this tall, with brown hair, about 5 years old? She's wearing a green t-shirt. Will asked the library staff, but no one had seen April. His panic grew. Maybe she went outside. Betting on that possibility, Will dashed out of the library. In the blazing sun, he ran through the streets, drenched in sweat. But April was nowhere to be found. His heart felt like it was going to burst, and tears welled up in his eyes. What if she was kidnapped? The worst thoughts crossed Will's mind. Maybe the large sum of money found with the key for locker number 38 was involved. Perhaps April had been taken as ransom. If so, it was his fault. In a state of panic, Will rushed to a public phone. With trembling hands, he dialed Daniel's number. Daniel, please help me. April is missing. It was clear from Will's voice over the phone that he was shaking. Daniel promised to come right away and hung up. Within minutes, Daniel's patrol car arrived in front of the library. He remained calm, asked the staff to make a building-wide announcement, and immediately had the entrances sealed off. Then he said, "Let's check the surveillance footage," and went with the staff to the monitoring room. Will sat on a bench in the library, holding his head in his hands. He couldn't organize his thoughts. The passage of time was terrifying. 1 minute felt like an hour. Frustrated by his own helplessness, he began to regret ever finding that key. After a while, Daniel returned. April was seen on the surveillance cameras. It seems she went outside alone before noon. Stay here in case she comes back. I'll call for backup and search the area. Will obeyed Daniel's instructions to wait but was restless. The urge to run out and search himself kept hitting him, but he trusted Daniel's directions. The library staff kindly brought Will some water. But his hands were shaking so much he could hardly hold the cup. As time passed, Will's anxiety only grew. Finally, after about 3 hours, Daniel's patrol car pulled up in front of the library again. Emerging from the back seat with a beaming smile was April. Will started to rush towards April but froze, overwhelmed by relief and tension. His emotions overflowed, and his heart started pounding intensely again. She was safe. That thought enveloped him. "Dad, I'm sorry." April looked up at Will, holding a bag with a hot dog. "I got hungry, so I went to a shelter nearby to get some lunch. I wanted to bring some back for you, but I got lost." Will, holding back tears, hugged April tightly. "Don't ever go out on your own again, okay?" "I was worried," he said, his emotions a mix of anger and relief, grateful that she was safe. Daniel explained the situation with a smile, watching the father and daughter. April had gotten lost on her way to the shelter and was helped by a staff member who happened to pass by. They took her in, fed her a hot dog, and after she had fallen asleep from exhaustion, they brought her to the police. In the evening, Will and April returned to the ruins. Exhausted, Will thought of lying down immediately as they approached their dwelling. But what awaited them was a shocking scene. The door to the ruins was wide open. Their belongings pulled out of their bags and scattered around. The cardboard they used as a bed was flipped over, and the room was a mess. Who would do such a thing? Will muttered as he looked at the wall. Pinned there was an envelope, just like the one he had found that morning. Inside the envelope was a short message. "Where is the money? Give it back." In that moment, Will felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly left April with the elderly couple next door, telling her not to go outside, and hurriedly left. He headed to the police station to seek Daniel's help again. Upon arrival, Will asked for Daniel but was told by a colleague, "Daniel has already left for the day." Something urgent came up. Hesitant to make a call so late at night, Will still felt the need to talk to Sarah. He needed to tell someone about the trashed state of the ruins, and why he had left April with the elderly couple, as the swirling anxiety was becoming unbearable. Will asked the colleague at the police station to use the phone and, upon getting permission, slowly dialed and reached Sarah's cell. "Hello?" A response came, but it wasn't Sarah's voice, it was a man's. Confused for a moment, Will wondered who it could be. He thought he had dialed the wrong number, but he recognized the voice. "Is that you, Will?" It was Daniel. "Yes, it is. I was calling Sarah's cell number." I answered because the call came from a police station number to Sarah's cell phone. Daniel responded matter-of-factly. Will's heart turned cold for a moment. Why did Daniel have Sarah's cell phone? Was something wrong? Actually, Sarah is currently receiving emergency treatment at the hospital. Daniel's voice had a clear tension. Hospital. Emergency. Will's heart clenched. His heart rate surged, and sweat formed on his palms. Why was Sarah in the hospital? What had happened? Will felt he needed to get to the hospital immediately. He rushed to the hospital, hoping all the way that Sarah was all right. The incident at the ruins was concerning, but that was secondary now. He pushed himself to the hospital, found Daniel waiting in the lobby. Daniel. How is Sarah? Daniel looked up at Will with a weary expression. She's still being treated. According to the doctors, a passerby found her bleeding from the head and called an ambulance. He explained quietly. Will stood frozen in place. His body felt heavy, his feet as if glued to the floor. Why had such a thing happened to her? The key and the large sum of money from the coin locker replayed in his mind. Maybe something bad had happened while Sarah was investigating that money and the map. Regret washed over him. Will and Daniel sat in silence in the waiting room. Daniel was clearly worried, but as a police officer, he maintained his composure. His eyes were fixed in the distance, but it was clear he was concerned about his daughter's safety. Time seemed to pass slowly, and every sound in the hospital felt distant. After a while, a doctor called Daniel over and began explaining Sarah's condition. Sarah has a mild head injury. There was bleeding, but the tests have shown no major issues. If everything goes well overnight, she should be able to be discharged tomorrow. Will, who had been listening outside the room, felt relieved, but his relief was short-lived. The reason Sarah had collapsed and why this had happened to her continued to worry him. The doctor added, she was awake when she arrived at the hospital but was a bit agitated. So we have given her sedatives. Daniel turned to Will and said, sorry to worry you. She should be okay now. Looks like she can leave tomorrow. Will took a deep breath and blurted out. I'm glad. I didn't know what I would do if something had happened to Sarah too. Daniel reacted to those words, something happened to Sarah too. Do you have other problems? Will hesitated for a moment but decided to be honest. Actually, when I got home, my place was ransacked. It might be because of that money and the map. Daniel listened silently to Will and quickly made a decision. I'll send police officers to your place right now. We can't ignore even a slight risk. However, Will immediately refused. My daughter is staying with an elderly couple nearby, and it's okay. We live like this, so there's nothing much to steal. But please let me wait here until Sarah wakes up. After thinking for a moment, Daniel nodded and suggested. All right. While we're waiting, let's step out for a bit. There's a diner across the hospital. Let's grab a coffee and relax. The two headed to the diner and ordered coffee. Will held the cup but couldn't bring himself to drink. His mind was filled with thoughts of Sarah, April, and the incidents at his home. Amidst these thoughts, Daniel began to speak. We don't know the details yet. But there might be a big issue hidden behind that map and the blueprints, said Daniel, prompting Will to lean in. What do you mean? The blueprints and the map of the area around the building aren't ordinary. There's a high chance they're involved in illegal transactions or fraud. The investigation is still ongoing, so I can't say much. But we need to prevent any further danger to you or Sarah. Daniel looked at Will seriously. Will listened silently, feeling a new wave of anxiety growing inside him. When they returned to the hospital, a nurse informed them that Sarah had woken up. Daniel told Will, she wants to speak with you too, and they both entered her room. Sarah still looked a bit pale but was clearly conscious. As Will approached, she smiled faintly and said, "Dad, there's something I want both of you to hear." Sarah continued, addressing Will. "I was curious about that map and the blueprints, so I did some research. What I found was that the map was of the area around a private elementary and middle school. And the blueprints were of the school building." "A school building? Why would that be?" "I don't know what the money is about yet, but I wanted to see the area around the school myself. So I went there on foot. That's when someone hit me from behind." Will was speechless. Don't ever do something so dangerous alone. His words were filled with self-reproach. He might have involved Sarah in this dangerous situation. As a father, Daniel could understand his concern for Sarah. Without raising his voice, Daniel gently reprimanded her. "Sarah, don't do something so risky again. Do you know how worried I was?" It was around noon the next day when it was decided that Sarah could be discharged after spending the night in the hospital. Daniel said, "I plan to take Sarah home with me today. She lives alone, but I'm worried and I want to keep her close for a while." Will apologized to Daniel. "I'm sorry, that map and the money have put you and Sarah in danger." Daniel shook his head quietly. "You did nothing wrong. It was Sarah's own choice to dive into that situation. As a journalist, she acts out of a sense of mission, and as her father, I'm proud of that. I can't just stop her." Will nodded but still felt uneasy inside. "I'm going back home now. Please let me know if there's any progress." Returning to the ruins, Will thought about cleaning up before picking up April. He didn't want to show her the ransacked room when she returned. He thought of organizing first to reassure her. However, as he approached the house, he saw that luxury car again. Previously, it had been too dark or too far to see the license plate clearly. But today he could make it out distinctly. Will memorized the license plate, repeating it over in his head to ensure he wouldn't forget. Trying not to look inside the car, he passed by and was about to open the door to their place when men got out of the car. Turning around, he saw a small Caucasian man in an expensive suit and pointed leather shoes in this heat, with two large men behind him. Will instinctively knew it was Connor Lee. "Mr. Will Miller, let's have it back," Connor said in a cold voice. "It's not in your house, we've checked." "You didn't report it to the police, did you?" Will tried to stay calm. "Isn't it rude not to introduce yourself after turning our home upside down?" Connor snorted. "Home? You call this dump your home?" He then coldly commanded, "I'm not asking for bad news. Return the money, the map, and the blueprints." Will stood his ground. "I've handed the money over to the police. I don't have the map or blueprints anymore." Connor replied without changing his expression, "Is that so? Then we'll have to retrieve it. It's better for you if we do it quickly. You wouldn't want to live looking over your shoulder, would you?" Without waiting for Will's response, Connor and his men returned to their car and left. Will watched until their car was out of sight, then hurried to the elderly couple's home to explain the situation. The thought of keeping April safe was swirling in his mind. It was possible that those men could return. Just the thought of something happening to April was suffocating. When he arrived at the elderly couple's home, he knocked on the door. They were always kind and understood his situation, but today's request felt particularly heavy. He calmed April, who was happy to return to their dwelling, and quietly started explaining. "I'm sorry, but due to some circumstances, could you look after April for just 3 more days? The homeless shelter doesn't allow children to stay without their parents." The elderly couple, though clearly worried, quickly agreed, "Of course, we'll take care of her. It was evident that they were concerned about why Will was leaving his daughter behind. April looked at Will with a worried expression. "Is something wrong, Dad? Are you okay?" April asked anxiously. Will replied as calmly as he could. "It's okay, April. Can you be a good girl and listen to them for just 3 days?" After a moment's thought, April nodded slightly. "Yes, but you have to come pick me up, promise, Dad." "Of course. I'll definitely come for you, so don't worry," Will said, placing his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. After entrusting his daughter to the elderly couple, Will started walking toward the police station. Along the way, he felt as if someone was behind him. When he turned around, he saw that luxury car maintaining a steady distance, following him slowly. Will immediately heightened his alertness. Just having left April, the thought of these men possibly knowing about her chilled him to the bone. He resolved to stay calm and not to hurry, instead making sure that the men didn't make any moves as he walked through the streets filled with people. At one point, Will spotted a nearby shopping mall and decided to use it to lose the car. Once inside the mall, he moved as naturally as possible toward another exit and came out again. Only then did he look back, but the luxury car was nowhere to be seen. Reassured that he had lost them, Will resumed his walk to the police station. Upon arrival, he saw Daniel just coming to work. Will's face showed a bit of relief at seeing him. "Sorry to keep you waiting." "Sarah's all right now," Daniel greeted him with a smile. "I'm relieved to hear that. But there's been a little problem." Will began to explain. "I finally managed to see the number plate of that suspicious luxury car those men were driving." Daniel's expression immediately turned serious. "Is that so?" "That's important information. I'll check it out right now." He took note of the number Will provided and quickly left the room. As Will waited, he thought deeply about April and their future. With danger seemingly so close, he was confused about how to protect their lives. After a while, Daniel returned with a laptop in hand and a stern look on his face. "The owner of that car is Connor Lee. He's a major real estate developer in this city." "Connor Lee? Real estate development? A president?" Will was unable to hide his surprise. It was hard for him to imagine such a prominent figure being involved with them. Daniel continued. "It appears he's the key figure in a luxury residential development project underway in this area. That map you found corresponds to the development area. And it seems that the blueprint you found belongs to a private school in that area, which is struggling financially and may be targeted for its land." Hearing this, Will began to see the connections. Connor must have been preparing a bribe to win over the school officials. Suddenly recalling the coin locker, Will asked, "So, was the large sum of money in that coin locker a bribe?" After a moment's thought, Daniel replied, "It's highly likely. A person like him wouldn't normally conduct transactions under his own name. He probably intended to pass the key as a bribe, with the recipient using it to retrieve the money." "I see. But then, why was the key dropped?" Will wondered aloud. "That's unclear. But what's important is that we've already seized both the key and the money." "You're in danger, that's true, but the police are now involved." "There's no need to worry," Daniel reassured him calmly. Will felt somewhat relieved, but was still concerned for April's safety. "I understand, but our home was just ransacked. And those men threatened to take the money back. April is safe for the next 3 days, but what should we do after that?" Daniel nodded seriously and said, "Let's think of measures to ensure safety for a while. Your and your daughter's safety is our top priority." Grateful for his words, Will still felt uneasy about the future. For now, he could only take things one step at a time and see how the situation unfolded. Stepping outside the police station, Will immediately felt a presence behind him. Even amidst the hustle and bustle of the city, this sensation weighed heavily on his back. Someone was following him. The sense of security he had while at the station vanished in an instant. Turning around, it wasn't the usual black luxury car, but a navy blue one that was quietly following him at a distance. Will altered his walking pace and occasionally ducked into alleys, trying to gauge the situation, but the navy car continued to follow him silently. His heart rate gradually increased and his vigilance grew. Even though he was relieved to have left April with the elderly couple, the unsettling situation only heightened his anxiety. Suddenly, the navy blue luxury car overtook him and stopped by the roadside. A sophisticated woman stepped out of the car. Wearing sunglasses and dressed in a long brown pantsuit, she exuded an aura of wealth. Her well-maintained long hair fluttered in the wind as she stood before Will. Through her sunglasses, her expressionless face was visible, but her eyes seemed to tell a story. She looked directly at Will and spoke calmly, "Please get in the car." Will immediately tensed up and replied coldly, "No. I don't know who you are, and it's rude to invite someone without introducing yourself." At his words, she took off her sunglasses and looked directly back at him. "I'm Sharon. Sharon Lee." At the mention of her name, Will instinctively stepped back. Sharon Lee, the daughter of Connor Lee, he realized instantly. Seeing Will's reaction, Sharon quickly apologized. "I know what my father has done to you. Please let me apologize. But there are too many eyes here, please get in the car." Despite his initial reluctance, Will was somewhat taken aback by her earnest demeanor, and got into the back seat of the navy blue luxury car. Inside, the cool air conditioning slightly eased his agitation as Sharon returned to the driver's seat. After driving in silence for a while, she took a deep breath and looked back at Will. "I'm truly sorry," she said, closing her eyes and showing a genuinely sad expression. She continued to speak earnestly, "I have been assisting my father with his work as his secretary. I respected him and believed that the land development he was doing was necessary for the future of our city." Sharon paused for a moment before resuming. "But I noticed recently that something was off with him, and I tracked his car. That's how I learned what he had done at your house and what he was involved in." Will listened quietly, frowning. Sharon went on. "And I found out yesterday that he had ordered his men to attack Sarah. When I discovered that, something inside me broke." For the first time, Will asked about her connection to Sarah. "You know Sarah?" "Yes, Sarah and I go way back. When I was 10, I attended a summer school where she was a junior counselor who took care of me. We kept in touch over the years, and even after growing up, I knew her contact information. We also followed each other's updates on social media." Will, surprised by this connection, slowly began to trust her a bit more. "So, what exactly do you want from me?" Sharon handed Will an envelope from the back seat. "These are the evidences of my father's wrongdoings I've gathered while working as his secretary. It may not be everything, but it's what I could gather. I don't want my father to continue doing wrong." As Will took the envelope, he warned Sharon, "If this goes to court, I will tell the whole truth. That could mean you'll lose the luxurious life you've been living." Sharon smiled quietly and replied firmly, "That's fine. I've struggled with this decision. But I hold dear the principle that life is not just about fulfilling one's own desires and greed." Will was surprised by her words. How do you know that phrase? Sharon answered calmly, Sarah told me that when she was a college student. I consulted her about my career path once. And she shared it while discussing her studies in journalism. It seemed like an important phrase to her, and I've thought about it a lot ever since. Convinced of Sharon's sincerity, Will decided to trust her. And firmly held on to the documents as he headed back to the police station. Upon arrival, Will immediately explained the situation to Daniel. And handed over all the evidence documents Sharon had given him. Daniel started examining the contents immediately with a serious expression. It's impressive how much evidence is here. Sharon betrayed her own father to bring this, Daniel sighed deeply. She's truly trying to do the right thing. After checking the documents, Daniel exhaled deeply. This could significantly advance the case. However, your and your daughter's safety come first. We need to proceed carefully. Will nodded silently, reaffirming his resolve to protect April. He felt complex emotions as he listened to Daniel's words. He was shocked yet profoundly grateful that Sharon had brought evidence against her own father. Without her courage and decision, they might not have even found a starting point to resolve this issue. He also understood her stance against her father after the attack on Sarah. Sarah was not just an acquaintance to Sharon, she had profoundly impacted her life. I now understand how significant Sarah has been to Sharon. Her choice to stand for justice is likely because Sarah was special to her, Will commented quietly. Daniel nodded deeply, looking at Will. This will push the investigation forward significantly. But we must ensure that you, Sharon, and April are safe. A big player like Connor Lee is unpredictable when cornered. Will felt a slight relief at those words, yet the unease never completely left him. Knowing the extent of Connor Lee's power and influence, he feared what could happen as they cornered him. Days later, the investigation progressed rapidly. Under Daniel's direction, Will and April temporarily relocated for their safety. April initially felt anxious about this change. But after Daniel explained it was to protect her father, she complied willingly. Sharon was also moved to a secure location under police protection. As Sarah recovered fully, she reawakened her journalistic instincts and started her own investigation into the case. While Will hoped she wouldn't do anything risky, he understood her passion and determination. Then, Daniel expressed his gratitude to Will. Without your cooperation, we couldn't have gathered so much evidence. Your discovery of the large sum of money and Sharon's documents provided critical evidence to expose Connor Lee's misconduct. Will humbly nodded. But we can't fully relax yet. There are too many people involved with Connor Lee. His influence spreads throughout the city. That's true, Daniel agreed. Those who participated in his bribery and corrupt dealings will also be investigated. They should be judged under the law. While Will felt a slight relief, unease still lingered in his heart. As Connor's investigation deepened, the extent of his reach remained uncertain. Above all, Will knew he couldn't let his guard down yet. He had to continue being vigilant to protect April. He renewed his determination to safeguard his daughter, feeling the necessity to remain cautious moving forward. Weeks later, as the investigation into Connor Lee deepened, preparations for the trial began in earnest. The evidence of his wrongdoing, including what Sharon provided, played a crucial role. As the trial approached, Will prepared to testify in court. He was determined to speak out about all of Connor Lee's misdeeds. On the day of the trial, Will stood in the courtroom and began his testimony calmly. I found a large sum of money in a coin locker. When I realized what it was, I felt terrified. But I knew I had to do the right thing for my daughter and reported it to the police. His words resonated heavily in the courtroom. Sharon, sitting in the audience, was filled with resolve. She too would testify against her father's crimes, which would be one of the trial's pivotal moments. Sharon began her testimony with a steady voice. What my father has done is completely contrary to everything I believed in. Seeing him profit at the expense of others broke something inside me. I stand here in this courtroom to stop what he has done. Her strong testimony tightened the courtroom's atmosphere. Connor, with a dismissive expression, listened to Will's and Sharon's pleas. Despite his lawyer's efforts to claim innocence, the overwhelming evidence and testimonies gradually dismantled his composed demeanor. The officials who collaborated with him in the bribery and illegal land deals for the school were also pursued, exposing the region's corrupt infrastructure. Finally, the day of judgment arrived, and the courtroom was tense. As the judge pronounced Connor Lee guilty, his face clouded over, and his arrogance visibly faded. All his illicit activities were judged under the law, and many associated with him were also penalized. After the trial, Will sighed deeply, filled with a sense of justice served and satisfaction for protecting April. Sharon approached him outside the courtroom and smiled quietly. Now, both the city and I can finally move forward, Sharon said softly. Will looked at her and nodded. Your courage changed everything. Thank you. Weeks later, Will and April began a new chapter in their lives. With the case and trial resolved, they moved on. With the help of Sarah and Daniel, Will rented a new apartment and spent peaceful days with April. Dad, are the bad people gone now? April asked, looking up at Will. Will gazed at his daughter and smiled gently. Yes, April. We all worked together to do the right thing. Now, we can live in peace. April nodded in relief at his words. April, in this house, you can do as you like. Let's paint the walls in your favorite colors. And create a room where you can hang lots of your favorite paintings. A bright smile spread across April's face. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. A few days later, Will visited Sarah's house and felt relieved to see her quietly painting in front of the large window overlooking her garden. She had been busy since the incident but seemed to have finally regained some peace of mind. It looks like you might create a good painting, Sarah, Will said with a smile. Sarah turned around and smiled back. Thank you, Will. I feel very calm now. The incident has been resolved. And everyone is taking new steps forward, which helps me concentrate on my art. April, intensely interested in Sarah's painting, ran up to her. Sarah, I want to be able to paint like you someday. Sarah looked at April kindly and picked up a new sketchbook from the desk. Here, April, this is for you. Draw lots of pictures with it, and show me some time. April's eyes sparkled as she took the sketchbook. Thank you. Next time, I'll draw a big picture just like you, Sarah. She jumped up happily. Seeing her smile, Will felt a warmth in his heart. The difficult times they had lived through seemed like a lie. Now that his daughter's smile never faded. Meanwhile, the community was also regaining a new breath of life. With Connor Lee's influence gone, support for schools and homeless aid organizations that had been stalled due to his negative influence resumed. And the entire area began to regenerate. Schools were revitalized with new programs, and children regained environments where they could learn towards a bright future. Will was also playing a part in this regeneration. Requested by the city's Board of Education, he was actively involved in education as a consultant. With his background as a teacher, he made significant contributions to curriculum reforms and improvements in student support programs. "Mr. Will, could we get your advice again?" asked a member of the education board. "Of course," Will answered with a beaming smile. "I'll do whatever I can for the students' future." His passion was the same as when he had been a teacher. Even though he wasn't standing at the lectern, being involved in education allowed him to feel his sense of mission again. Meanwhile, Daniel had been promoted and given a significant post at the police station. His ability to solve many cases had become indispensable to the community. He led his subordinates with calm and precise judgment, continually ensuring the area's safety. "Daniel, congratulations on the promotion." Will celebrated. Daniel smiled sheepishly. "Thank you, Will. I'll keep doing my best to ensure the safety of our town. And seeing you all live happily is the best motivation." Sarah also advanced in her career, becoming the head of the podcast division in the news department at her newspaper. Her passion and insight attracted listeners and provided sharp perspectives on local issues. When Will commented, "I hear your podcast is really interesting," Sarah laughed and replied, "Thanks, Will. But I want to reach even more people. I want to share what we've experienced and how much this town has changed." Sharon was also walking a new path in life. After much deliberation about how she could help those affected by her father's wrongdoings, she decided to work as a paralegal in a law firm. She felt the importance of upholding justice through law and took it as her mission. "When I heard you entered the legal field, I was surprised," Will shared. Sharon smiled gently. "The desire to help those involved with my father was strong. I had to choose this path to do the right thing. And Sarah's words have always supported me. Living righteously surpasses personal greed." As time passed, about 10 years later, Will, Sarah, and Daniel sat together on Daniel's porch, enjoying a peaceful afternoon. The scent of coffee carried on the wind, and birds chirped in the distance. They each had walked new paths in life, but being able to gather like this was their greatest joy. "I never thought a peaceful day like this would come 10 years ago," Will said thoughtfully. Daniel chuckled. "That key to the coin locker you found was the beginning of everything." Sarah added with a smile, "Really. But the best reward is seeing everyone happy like this." Just then, they saw April running towards them from a distance. Today, she had become a high school student. The three of them smiled and welcomed her. "Welcome back, April," Will called out, waving his hand. And April responded with a beaming smile, "I'm home, Dad." April climbed onto the porch and sat down among the adults. "Being a high school student feels so grown up. But I'm really looking forward to what comes next." Sarah gently placed her hand on April's shoulder and said, "April, you've grown up so beautifully. Keep walking the path you believe in." Daniel nodded and added, "I'm looking forward to seeing what future you build." Encouraged by their words, April declared with a smile, "I want to be a strong and kind adult like everyone here." Seeing his daughter like this, Will felt a warmth in his chest. "You're already admirable, April. But let's keep building a new future together." The four of them looked out at the gentle sunset, positively thinking about their new lives ahead. Having overcome a difficult past, a warm and hopeful future awaited them.